am so happy to see everyone here tonight. Welcome to the Evenings with Hulings Salon series. Tonight, I am filling in for our Executive Director, Elizabeth Hulings, who wishes she could be here in person with us, but she's here in spirit. My name's Penelope Thomas. I work with the Clark Hulings estate, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Clark Hulings Fund. I would like to start by thanking our co-producer, Shirley Holland. We could not do this without you, Shirley. Thank you. I'd also like to introduce our moderator, Peter Trippi. He's the editor-in-chief of Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. And after I've introduced Stephanie, I will turn the evening over to him. So our guest tonight is Stephanie Stebich, the Margaret and Terry Stent director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Stephanie is responsible for the nation's premier collection of American art and exhibition, research, publication, education, and digital media programs at the museum and its Renwick Gallery. Stebich serves on the Smithsonian's Capital Board, the Smithsonian London Strategic Advisory Board, and is co-chair of the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. Prior to this position, she was the executive director of the Tacoma Art Museum. At Tacoma, she secured major collection gifts, including the Hobb family collection of Western American art, and that includes a Clark Hulings painting, which we'll circle back to, and master works from the 1790s to the present by Charles Bird King, Thomas Moran, Frederick Remington, and Georgia O'Keeffe. Stebich has served as assistant director of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts and assistant director at the Cleveland Museum of Art. She was previously a trustee of the Association of Art Museum Directors, where she led and implemented its diversity initiative as chair of the membership committee. Stephanie currently serves as a trustee of the American Alliance of Museums and is a member of the executive committee. So as you can tell, Stephanie is a very busy and accomplished person. So we are just delighted to have her with us tonight. So please allow me to turn over the evening to Peter Trippi's capable hands, and I'll see you for questions at the end.
Thank you, Penelope. Can you hear me, Penelope? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Just want to make sure. I apologize perhaps because there is a thunderstorm rolling across New York City where I live. The connection seems all right at the moment, but I think it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge to be together with all these digital distractions like weather. We're especially grateful to Stephanie for making time for us because we know that she's traveling herself. Stephanie, it's great to see you again after quite a while. I'm afraid we have not seen each other during the pandemic, but we've been just aware of each other back and forth through emails. Stephanie and I go way back to 1990 when we both worked for Mimi Gaudieri at the Association of Art Museum Directors in New York. So Stephanie is an old friend, not old in the chronological sense, but it is hard to believe that's well over 30 years ago. So I'm just thrilled to see this great museum in Washington, D.C., led by such a terrific professional, a nice person, hugely enthusiastic about American art in all its forms. And we are really going to enjoy this conversation tonight. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm delighted to be here. I see you're in a magazine-filled, book-filled space. Perfect for you. Although we were also colleagues when you were museum director. And I have the Kogod Courtyard and the historic old patent office behind me, one of the modern wonders of Washington, D.C. So just in terms of where we're sitting in this virtual world.
It's a truly wonderful building in the center of Washington, and it's great to see it loved and open again. It's just, well, what a collection. We will talk about the Smithsonian American Art Museum later in the evening. Basically, I'd like to do a shout out to Shirley Holland as well. Of course, thank you for your support and production. And also, of course, to the Hulings Fund. Everybody there worked so hard to bring together interesting people like Stephanie with interesting people like those of you in the audience. So welcome to everybody, and we look forward to hearing your questions and comments later. What we're going to do is review some slides as launch pads. Stephanie and I, we've looked at these already so that we're in harmony about what exactly they contain. I thought it would be helpful to jump ahead, if I may, to the first slide. This is a summary of an exhibition now touring the United States, Many Wests, Artists Shape an American Idea. I think it's a fantastic title in every way. And as you can see on the left, It is a really interesting tour schedule itinerary. The exhibition is currently on view in Idaho, in Boise, and it will complete its tour in Washington at the Smithsonian, where Stephanie works. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is very much part of an initiative, one in a series of exhibitions created through a multi-year, multi-institutional partnership formed by the Smithsonian American Art Museum as part of the Art Bridges initiative. I'm hoping maybe that Stephanie can help us unpack some of that because it's all very exciting. Like, for example, what is Art Bridges for those who don't know? Stephanie, maybe you could tell us a bit about the exhibition, how it came to be, who's involved, what it aims to accomplish, how it's being received at its first venue. We'll talk about its subsections just a little bit after.
Well, thank you, Peter, for thinking to invite me. Clark Hulings is really one of my favorite artists in the Haub collection that came to my former institution, the Tacoma Art Museum. So I'm delighted you thought of me. Penelope, I appreciate the warm introduction. And Shirley, thanks for your production assistance. So it is quite a leap for me, I have to be honest, to talk about an exhibition I haven't seen. It is in Boise, Idaho, and the pandemic being what it is, it's not a moment where one can travel as freely. However, if you're traveling, do make a beeline to these various fellow museums that have been great collaborators. So, Peter, the question always is, how did this all start, and what exactly is Art Bridges? So if I tell you who the protagonists are, then you'll figure out what Art Bridges is. So I arrived at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in April of 2017, and shortly thereafter, I got a call from a dear friend, Liz Glassman, the now retired and fabulous former president of the Terra Foundation for American Art, always a person with big ideas. And she happens to be on the board of Crystal Bridges as a friend of Alice Walton. Alice Walton then starts Art Bridges, an initiative with a focus on traveling and sharing American art from the smallest to the largest hamlets. Sharing the power of the American experience. So they had a terrific idea to pick a couple of major museums with rich holdings and see if they could do interesting partnerships. How could you share your collections in your state, in your region, or in our case, across the country? They remembered that I had come from the Tacoma Art Museum, and as they looked at their map of Art Bridges projects, they realized they weren't doing didn't have the coverage in the Pacific Northwest. Stephanie, might you partner in terms of your collections? Of course, that's my mission, get the national collections of American art out. And of course, I have some happy memories of my great colleagues and great institutions in the Pacific Northwest. That said, I didn't want to pick the museums. I sent my curators out to see at least 20 institutions in a couple of states, like the ones we picked, Oregon, Idaho, Washington State, and Utah. And before we knew it, we had an agreement for a 5-year project, thankfully with a $2 million budget and in 2 phases. First, sending top works out from my institution, like a George O'Keeffe, to the Utah Museum of Fine Arts and Thomas Moran. And then the second phase, doing something really difficult, working with many curators to come up with one theme and put all of our collections together to tell a story that we couldn't tell ourselves, which is, what does the American West mean in terms of modern and contemporary artworks? What are the new important subject matters? Is that brief enough, Peter? What did I miss?
So helpful. Thank you. Absolutely. That is tremendously useful as a launch pad. Let's go ahead then, if we may, to the first section. This is called Caretakers. And I would love for you to tell us a bit about how the curatorial team, and by the way, to mention some or all of them as you wish, how they came up with these 3 categories. That would be great.
Thank you. I have to give credit to my former curator of Latinx art, who was also serving as my acting chief curator. That would be Dr. E. Carmen Ramos, who's now moved to the National Gallery of Art, to our dismay, but to her great ability. Anyhow, she was the lead at SAM with Anne Highland, also as our curatorial coordinator. And the exhibition was developed into 3 parts, and we'll go through those parts. First, a section called Caretakers, and it is what you think, artists redefining what it means to take care of themselves, their communities, as well as their futures. And so artists that are influenced with and have commitments and thinking about stewardship, of course, of our land, of our history, language, and culture. This section, these are artists who really kind of bridge the past, the present, and looking for a better future as well. So often societal and environmental needs are the focus. So quite a number of Native American contemporary artists, as you point out right here. And we, of course, made the important decision to identify people's tribal affiliations appropriately. And when possible, also have artist voices talking about their intent and their process and their own history included in the exhibition. So that's the first section, Caretakers.
May I ask one question? To your knowledge, then, the checklist for the exhibition remains the same all the way through the tour. Is that about right?
With every exhibition, you always lose some things because they're
Yep.
needed. Some have slightly larger spaces. We definitely have a core of the exhibition, key images that really anchor each of the sections. However, there are some things that frankly can't make the tour, and we have things that are substituted. Art Bridges was also generous in allowing us to purchase additional photographic prints so that we would have exhibition copies that could make the whole tour. Good point,
Great.
Peter. Thank you.
Great. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. So here's the second section, Memory Makers.
Thank you. And of course, with this exhibition, we've been very mindful about honoring and acknowledging the indigenous people on whose land these museums sit. Certainly, we are all aware of the indigenous peoples of our country and the many contributions they've made, not only artistically. All right, memory makers. Hopefully the themes are pretty self-evident, but these are artists who transmit what we call cultural memory. And they often use portraiture, they tell stories, as you can see below. They talk about work and creativity. And these are artists who focus on that experience of America that is often overlooked, the stories by African Americans, by Asian Americans, Latinx, and indigenous people. So stories often marginalized, less known, or entirely overlooked. So memory is a key part of key events in the life of our country. Certainly the internment of our Japanese citizens, moments about the Asian American experience in terms of creating the important railway network. So a lot of visual storytelling in this memory makers section as well, and ensuring that we have cultural memory that lives on through these artworks.
Thank you. And the third and final section is Boundary Breakers.
I think one can call almost every artist a boundary breaker. In this sense, we really sometimes are talking about really unusual, the unexpected. Sometimes it's about the choice of materials or process. So also it's about themes, unsettling common beliefs we might hold dear of the West. So some artists have been using maps and documentary photography, talking about the symbols and talking about the movement of peoples across our land. So these artists in particular are very strong in breaking down these notions of identity, talking about true lived experiences, and also talking about some of the romanticized stories of the West. They're refuting these, they're inserting their own narratives and experiences. So they offer us new ways of thinking about the American West. It is the third category of the exhibition.
This is an especially wonderful juxtaposition here, two very different visions of femininity. The lady on the left is fantastic. I would not want to mess with her. She is definitely in charge of her destiny. It's a really interesting group of pictures. Obviously, we're only showing 6 out of many works of art in the checklist, and I encourage everyone to visit the website of the Boise Art Museum or of any of those museums that are participating in the tour. There's an especially nice webpage on the Smithsonian American Art Museum site devoted to the show. So that's something I'm really looking forward to seeing at one venue or another, hopefully several. It seems to me that the idea of a team of curators around the country working together, that's a challenge, but also a thrill in the sense that everyone is learning from everyone else. The development period, can you just back up a little in terms of were there in-person meetings? Were there visits to collections by the various participants to look together and talk through themes? What was your sense of that journey?
Yes, thank you, Peter. One of the important aspects of the grant was really an initial convening in Washington, D.C., pre-pandemic, where we really shared the highlights of the collection as much as we could share physically in the galleries or in storage. And then, of course, we're all leaning on technology. And so we really kind of made deep decks of images available. For the first phase, again, as I mentioned, institutions said, boy, we would really like to borrow this artwork from the national collections, which would open up new conversations with existing pieces. So sometimes it was about artists that were particularly important, or communities that they wanted represented, or even, for example, Thomas Moran went back to Utah probably since the first time it's been painted, of a wonderful canyon scene, and that was deeply meaningful at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. So yes, first in person, and then actually the pandemic forced us to do everything online, and it allowed us actually to have more people participate, because in each session we would include educators. We'd include the registrar's team, so that it could be a professional development opportunity for us all. We do not have all the answers, I assure you. As the National Museum, we are learning a lot from our colleagues about how they connect with communities. We were introduced to new artists that we got very excited about. And again, the profound insight, I think, for us all was the deep and I believe sustain. Again, this is a 5-year project, and I suspect we'll go back to Alice Walton and her team, Paul Provost, who's the head of Art Bridges, and say, boy, we have even more wonderful ideas. Can you help realize them? So these kinds of curatorial and other staff collaborations were really helpful. We pushed each other to ensure that our practices centered artists and always our visitors and the communities that we were trying to address. So we asked ourselves, what are these kind of old-fashioned authoritative museum models and stories that we need to rethink? And we held hands and we kind of jumped into the deep end of the swimming pool, so to speak, but felt very confident that we were going to find new ways of working and encourage us to challenge some deeply held institutional practices. Museums are frankly very hidebound institutions, and training is not always up to date with the realities of the needs of our communities. And so again, a unique experience. I would recommend this kind of a collaboration to anyone if you could pull it off. And here's the kicker for those of you listening: we've done this in the Pacific Northwest. This is a big country. We'd be happy to work with another group of museums in another region, maybe with a community foundation. And if we don't do it over 5 years, I think we can do it a little faster. But it's a great way to share collections and knowledge and do more together than we could, of course, alone.
Well, that's an exciting invitation. Thank you. I hope everyone is making a note of that. Anyone who cares about this kind of exploration. I wonder about responses so far. Now, I understand that you haven't been in the room with the art at Boise. I wonder about any comments or reactions you've heard from colleagues as the show opens earlier this summer, going forward now as planning begins for the next venue, et cetera. Anything that surprised you or intrigued you?
Well, we've gotten good press in Idaho. The Idaho Magazine had a terrific review of the exhibition as it opened in Boise. We've gotten national press. There have been, obviously, this is a time of social reckoning, and museums are not exempt from the need to better represent all of our Americans and American stories. And I believe it was a New York Times article that talked about museum practices that need to be rethought. And this project was the leading example of how museums should think anew, that they should share collections, they should work with regional museums, mid-sized museums, and offer more together. And again, update the ways of thinking about art making and storytelling for this moment in American history.
Well, it is quite a moment in American history, as you say. So this project definitely is addressing a lot of things on our collective minds. Let's go ahead and move forward, if we might, to this slide. This very familiar material to Stephanie, as Penelope mentioned. Stephanie directed the Tacoma Art Museum in the state of Washington and was very involved in bringing to the permanent collection this fantastic group formed by the Hub family of Western artworks. And maybe you could talk with us about how that came to be, just for those who don't happen to know this exciting story. And also then maybe we could talk about how a collection like this one connects to or differs from the artworks on view in many Wests. It's an interesting juxtaposition, perhaps.
Thank you, Peter. I knew you would have pointed questions for me, and here they are. So the Haupt family, a German family who happened to have honeymooned in the United States, had ties to Tacoma, Washington. And when they got to a certain age, although they had spent time in the United States, had even property in Tacoma, would come with their family. They were a German family with deeply held generational family businesses. Anyhow, the moment came when they thought, where should this collection go? Where would it have a lot of impact? Where would it have meaning? And as luck would have it, Tacoma was an important family location for them. And interestingly enough, here is this city at the very coast of edge of the United States, which was in many ways the end of this migration west for many Americans, did not have a major Western art collection. Actually, there was nothing really significant in terms of broad Western American art collections in the entire state of Washington. And so after dating, so to speak, I had long conversations with the Haubs about what would it look like, how could we do justice to the collections. A significant gift, $20 million, was offered by the Haubs to create a whole new wing, brand new galleries, endow a curatorship, have a series of public programs as well connected to this, and to really tell a new story of the American West, beginning with a map, reminder that the West in America for some days was Connecticut, and then the boundaries would shifted, and then of course Native American lands changed over time as well, and due to forced resettlement and such. So this is a collection that is of significant size, several hundred works, plus over time you're picking a nice range here, contemporary artists like John Nieto, and of course the great Thomas Moran, who's done a little editing here. When he was on this location, there were already some roads and other elements of human settlement here along the Green River. And the Haub collection, of course, is a private collection, and so it reflects the passions and interests. A German couple who didn't really want to focus on battle scenes as part of their collecting of the American West. I remember when they talked about that. And we have a national collection. We have a public collection that is always the product of gifts, both individual and collective gifts, opportunities. We are the recipient of sometimes federal collections. So the GSA, the General Services Administration, occasionally will give us some old post office murals from the WPA, or collections will come in from different agencies into these national holdings. And then of course, smart acquisitions, strategic purchases made by curators at different moments. So we have a story of the United States that we're telling versus, again, a private vision of the West created by the Haubs, and our collection is constantly being reinterpreted. Ever since these works have entered our collection, we think about new comparisons, and they are also go out generously on loan. I know, for example, Seth Hopkins, a terrific colleague at the Booth Museum, he has requested some works from our collection. It is our obligation to send our collection out, even on long-term loan, up to 3 works to other museums across the country. And we're delighted that our works are on view. So different collections for different audiences in some cases, and certainly different creation stories for these collections. And we continue to collect. I think the Haub collection may be fairly intact, and they may not really be buying to add to the collection. I can't definitively speak to that. I'm no longer at the helm at the Tacoma Art Museum.
Well, I know you still care very much about Tacoma and about its collections and its people. Let's look at these slides, though. I think it's wonderful that we're able to see 2 very different kinds of art that both reflect the West in the Haub collection. The idea of that was very much that family's desire to buy this and to buy that. Let's talk a bit about the public programming. I had forgotten that it was a $20 million grant to support not only the building and the display, but also programming I guess, zooming in on themes related to the West. What excited you the most when you were at Tacoma Was there a particular symposium or installation that was especially intriguing or provocative for you before you came to Washington?
Thank you, Peter. Every story, you have to always start it right. So obviously we had long conversations with the Haubs about what their vision was and what we could do uniquely at the museum to honor their collection and their generosity. Also, the community responded so positively initially about the project. I'll tell you about a funny little story. We also traveled nationally to see other museums and see what they were doing really well. How could we do it the same as, if not a little bit better? And then at the groundbreaking, we had the governor, we had our congressman, Derek Kilmer at the time, still there in that role. And then we had the Puyallup Nation doing a kind of a blessing. Again, these are historic Puyallup lands, and a kind of a welcoming of this collection and of this new building that was added onto the new wing, Haub wing, to the Tacoma Art Museum. So the funny story is that to get people excited, reproductions of the collection were made as banners on the kind of construction fencing. And one day I got a call and said, one of the banners is missing, it's been stolen. I imagine it's in somebody's living room or in their garage. So people were eager to embrace these works of art. And again, John Nieto, what also happens, as you know, Peter, well, is that when a gift arrives, shortly other gifts arrive. Oh, I didn't know you were collecting this.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
I got a call from the Forbes family saying, we have a wonderful John Nieto and we love the Haubs. They're neighbors in Wyoming. I'm not sure what neighborhood vicinity. I grew up in the suburbs. A neighbor is somebody within your block in Wyoming. It's miles and miles, acres and acres. Anyhow, they said we'd like to make a gift to the Tacoma Art Museum to honor the Haubs. And then a second John Nieto came into the collection. So
Great.
Thanks for wonderful memories.
First of all, I think we have to track down that happy owner of the stolen banner. That's kind of exciting. We want to know what their story is. Why do they love that so much? That's kind of intriguing. It's not needed anymore, so there's no harm done. And the other piece of it would be, indeed, collections inspire further collections. And that's a really lovely aspect of museum work, that there is a continuum that will survive us all. It keeps going forward. And, it is so powerful to think on that and to see change within a museum's collection and also its displays. Now, let's go, if we may, to your current home in Washington. Yes. This, again, just two out of many, many works of art from the American West. Fantastic things all through the building and surely in storage as well. You've just talked about the sharing initiative that's underway. This collection, of course, formed over many more years than the Haub family collection, and coming in through all sorts of channels, as you say, different federal sources, not to mention private donors. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what SAM, if I may call it that, has now in the way of Art of the West, and where you think it's going in the future.
Thank you, Peter. You've certainly picked one of our great American landscapes, which has a room of its own in the Billings and John Kay Gallery. It is at the end of the hallway and it stops everybody in their tracks. I remember again, pre-pandemic, we had a group of Chinese students, and of course they were dutifully following their guide and looking at things, but suddenly the guide went down the hallway and the group stopped. They were so entranced by this image of the Sierra Nevada, so majestic, of course enhanced from its own reality. And these early works from what we call the sort of explorer artists, a key thing in the history of the art of the American West is wisely a lot of artists were included in the early expeditions, the military expeditions, the geographic expeditions, to paint, to record, to render back to the rest of the country, mostly located along the eastern seaboard, what was out here in this new land. And these images, particularly by Thomas Moran, you could have picked our great Thomas Moran Yellowstone images, were instrumental in developing the uniquely American idea of the national park system, going against our capitalist instinct and raiding and mining and pulling out the resources of these areas, but rather saving them for all of us. So the beer shed is as majestic as you imagine, great scale, some 12 feet or so. George Catlin, we have a Catlin by the boatload, over 1,000 works. And I'm sorry you didn't show some of the current images, but I'll talk about some of the things that we're buying. So Catlin, again, a unique story about his trip west, inspiring other artists, of course, to do the same thing, and did a series of very important portraits that actually got a call from a Canadian colleague saying, could we borrow your Catlin images of some Canadian leaders whose communities we still serve today, and these are important images. Good. So more record keeping, more documentary in these portraits that Catlin, and some others are a little bit romanticized as well too. But what are we buying now, Peter? That's what I want to share with you. We're buying wonderful crafts. I run 2 museums. There's also the Renwick Gallery, the National Museum of Craft. We bought a great Gail Tremblay, a fabulous artist too, from the Pacific Northwest, who makes baskets. However, she uses 16mm film, and she gives them wonderful titles as well. So we are buying, or Preston Singletary, who does these great treasure boxes, or Ravens figured rattles and things like that. So we're buying a lot of also photography. There are African-American photographers, or Black cowboy images. And you, of course, showed some images of some important Latinx artists who are also, like Laura Aguilar, has a relationship with the land and her own history and her own body. So we're really collecting these newer stories around the American West. And the American West is still a thrilling topic for many artists, as we all know. And
as we all know, including many people on this call, definitely. I think I'm so eager to see the presentation of Many Wests at SAM in Washington when it arrives as the final venue for the tour, in particular, because then we'll see those often quite cutting edge and new works juxtaposed with some of these more traditional things that you have in the permanent collection on regular view. And maybe by the time that actually comes around, you'll be able to show more of your recent acquisitions to remind people of how this is ever changing. That's something to look forward to, both at the main building and also at the Renwick.
Yes, indeed. I think each installation will feel different, especially as you leave the special exhibition and go into the galleries again of the Watka Museum, or the Boise Art Museum, Jordan Schnitzer Museum. You'll have different experiences, of course, to see how this special exhibition pulled together. Again, remarkably, everyone contributed very equally to the conception and the checklist, and then to sort of see, what didn't quite make it, other pieces that are cherished that may be in their permanent gallery spaces.
So I wonder today, as you and your curator team look across the country and at the West and acquire things that are important and interesting and new, is there any advisory team as well? I don't know how that works. Obviously, you have all sorts of supporters in all different forms, but is that something where you might, or the curators might consult regular fans or kindred spirits in various states to talk about what's going on the ground in a particular state or region?
Are these people from the Smithsonian talking about?
Peter, just to again refine the question, are you talking about what our practice is at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, or what the practice was for Many West? At SAM, I'm actually
for SAM. Yes.
Thank you. At SAM, we of course sit in the largest museum education and research institute in the world, the Smithsonian Institution, 175 years old this year, and a great historic video on YouTube I encourage you to see. Anyhow, we have great resources: the National Museum of American History, the National Museum of American Indian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So we have great colleagues who we lean on heavily. However, one thing we are doing, and this has been such a great experience for us, really, frankly. We are enriched by this more than we are expending our own staff resources to ensure that the collaboration goes smoothly. We are working on a reinstallation and a reimagining of all of our galleries. And so we want to reinsert the Native American story in American art. We want to make sure the Asian American story is well represented in American art and the American experience. Landscapes, we are now juxtaposing historic landscapes with contemporary landscapes. We are looking at artists like Fred Wilson, who does these wonderful black glass mirrors referencing Othello and Shakespeare, and we're putting it in a gallery of 19th century American white marble figure. Conversations across time, but common concerns and new perspectives, again, including artists who have important perspectives in understanding ourselves and understanding others, particularly at this moment. It is a moment of great flux in our country, and I think museums are unique spaces to foster learning together. And I also believe museums are safe places for difficult conversations through art.
Yes, dialoguing, absolutely. So that's so heartening to hear that there's a rethinking across genres and regions. It isn't just the West by any means that's coming under the microscope. We'll finish our slide section with this juxtaposition, if we might. A lot of the people on the call tonight are fans of the work of Clark Hulings. And I know you are too, Stephanie, as we see from this marvelous painting in the Haub collection at Tacoma. It's an absolute beauty. Can I ask you what about this picture delights you or intrigues you? You saw it long ago, obviously, in the Haub's possession.
Yes. Also, what's missing in your image is a wonderful frame that it sits in, a kind of a barn timber frame. Gives it brings out the kind of the wood and the color of the buildings and the donkeys here as well. So this is a house favorite at the Tacoma Art Museum. No question about the moment it was hung. Everybody said, "Wow." And what is it? You almost feel cold looking at this. It is such a compellingly rendered image. And you might imagine in the history of art, white is a very difficult, and snow, very difficult to render. And it is a snow with such depth. It's trodden on snow, although it still looks fairly fresh there. The hint of a blue sky. There's a sense of movement here as well, too, of activities that still need to take place. The Haubs have a funny story as well, too. If one could make a close-up, I'm sorry I didn't ask you to do that earlier, on the left-hand side of the image is a kind of a pump station or some kind of a grocery store and such. And there was, I think, a Pepsi, there's a kind of a Pepsi Cola sign, I think, not a Coca-Cola sign. And the Haubs were also friendly with the head of Pepsi Cola. And so they enjoyed showing this artwork to them. As they see, Pepsi reaches across the country. I hope I'm getting that story right. Oh no, all wrong. Well, Coca-Cola that's on the right side.
Well, there are both, in fact. I was going to comment that this is an equal opportunity business in front of us. We see the Coke and Pepsi logos. So I would be okay with that because I can't touch any Pepsi product. I love Diet Coke. So I would be feeling very comfortable in that cafe.
Indeed. Well, thank you for calling that out. I haven't seen the picture in a while, and the image size is a little small. Anyhow, also the picture really pulls you in. This great perspective. You have a view onto the mountains, into this a cloudy evening. And again, there's a kind of a three-dimensional quality. It's so crisp and pristine an image, and it's an unusual image. It's not your standard landscape. It's not a still life. It's not a historic painting. It is really actually kind of a daily life image, but somehow he has made it visually interesting for all of us. In the different pathways, we kind of follow the tracks, and you see it's also a historic picture. It is different ways of transportation. Sometimes the old ways work better than the tire trucks, presumably, of trucks that have gone down this pathway too. And there's a stillness to the image. Although one senses there's probably some sound of these beasts of burden moving across
Yes.
the picture plane horizontally. That's just my view of it. I'm sure many other individuals, Penelope and others at the Clark Hulings Fund can give 20 or more other interpretations of the piece. Peter, what strikes you? What do you like about this image?
That is a very helpful interpretation. I myself agree with everything, and also would underscore the mixing of the past and the present. The modernity of those logos lets us know that this is a picture more or less of our time. And I think that that is something that characterizes much of Clark's work, that there is an aspect of not trying to be old-fashioned, of trying to show that some things just endure, and that's the way of some parts of the world. Of course, he painted worldwide, not only in the West and northern Mexico, but also in Europe, etc. I feel that this idea of evoking stories of real people and places without actually narrating them, without giving us a specific storyline that we have to stick to. It is not illustrative of a particular episode in a movie or a novel. That's a great gift that Clark is able to put us into that frame of mind and then let us be independent and come up with our own approaches to what might be happening or what inspired this in the first place. I agree with you, it is virtuosic work. It is a masterpiece, certainly within his oeuvre, and it's so wonderful that Tacoma has this forevermore. The
Indeed,
idea,
Peter, that's also one of my favorite features, which is an electrical pole, and you'll be hard pressed to try to find the electrical lines that go across.
well spotted, more modernity. It seems to me that this idea of, we were looking earlier in the slides at artworks that are in many cases informed by conceptualism, by minimalism, by pop, by craft, of course, you've mentioned as well. These are in front of us examples of very good realism, and Clark Hulings was a realist master. You certainly have in the collection at Smithsonian and as well, of course, Tacoma, other examples of recent realism that are really worth celebrating. On the right, it was my decision, not Stephanie's, to include this work by a very young man, a Chinese American artist who lives in Texas, Kyle Ma. We have covered him several times in Fine Art Connoisseur magazine, and he is very much a rising star in the world of contemporary realism. And I just wanted to underscore the fact that he, as someone who is not from, if you will, the Cowboys and Indians tradition of demographically, and happens to be living in Texas, but wasn't always living there, is just as in love with the Southwest as Clark Hulings was. And that, I think, is intriguing, that this is not in any way a passion of the past. It is definitely something that lives on now. And I dare say that some of the acquisitions that Tacoma and Sam will make in the future will encompass realism as much as they encompass photography or any other genre or art form. I wonder if you have thoughts about how realism and the artists who make it today can pivot, if necessary, to highlight things that are touching upon those very urgent themes we were discussing in relation to many Wests. And what I'm getting at is that there is nothing wrong with an image of the 19th century, of settlers crossing into new territory. That is a historical fact. It happened, and if someone can paint it well, hooray for them. But I wonder if some of these skills, which are very, bring a person into the scene in a very compelling way, whether those can be woven into this more complicated and open-minded new phase of collecting and exhibiting.
Thank you, Peter. That's a question that requires some reflection. Let me begin also by saying at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, we do not yet own a work by Clark Hulings. I'm hoping that somebody might share one with the nation and think about a gift to us.
Duly
let me
noted.
know where there is one that I should be hunting for. As you know, Peter, in the history of art, there has always been the yin and yang, the pull between abstraction or abstracted, less real images and realism. You see it in the Egyptians with the scale difference between the pharaoh and others, and sphinxes, and then of course the Greco-Roman traditions, just to name two oppositional groups, generally in the same region of the world. That goes up to contemporary times. Of course, the dramatic moment was the introduction of photography. And so if you think about a great French painter like Tissot, who was all the rage, couldn't, long list of people who would want to acquire such a work, and now his name is forgotten because the kind of hyper-realism painting was in many ways kind of pushed aside in favor of this new world of photography. As you may have read, hopefully in many a newspaper, we just purchased a major collection, the L.J. West collection of early American photography. Includes a photographic jewelry collection, includes early American daguerreotypes from the 1840s and on, and then it includes the largest collection of daguerreotypes produced by the three leading African American daguerreotypists working at the time, both pre-Civil War, often as freemen in cities like Cincinnati. These were artists, they were studio leaders, and they were entrepreneurs. Photography was an exciting new thing, and it democratized photography. I think there'll always be an instinct and a desire for representation. Picasso, an artist that I like a great deal and studied, he said there is no such thing as abstract art. Perhaps it is because the mind looks for an image, looks for something that is familiar to us. So I'm just as excited about representational art as I am about abstracted images. And certainly in the world of craft, we've gotten away from the need to have it be functional.
Right, right.
And we now really understand it for a new way of looking at materials and processes and just artistic exploration.
Terrific. Well, congratulations on that recent acquisition. That is so exciting. I'm going to take the liberty now of closing the share so that we can see each other. Hi, Penelope. There we go. I see lots of friendly faces. Basically, I thought it might be helpful to open the floor to any comments or questions. I see that there are some chats. They may be technical rather than thematic. I'm not quite sure. Wood Bearers of Chimayo is indeed the title. Thank you. That's very helpful. I opted not to include titles in the slides because I didn't want to distract anybody from the names of the artists. So please forgive me for that. And also, I didn't include frames. Stephanie's quite right about the frame on the Tacoma picture by Clark Hulings. It's fantastic.
Peter, if I can go back to your other question too, and give a citation for folks to read a couple of things as the chat box hopefully lights up, because I know we have a group of curious folks tuning in. So in the Washington Post, my hometown newspaper, Philip Kennicott, the art and architectural critic, wrote a really provocative piece last November called "America Needs an Epic Narrative Right Now." An epic narrative is what's needed. And of course, he is talking about art history. And so thankfully, he began with the galleries at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We're already beginning to have these exciting juxtapositions. So he talks about our great Moran painting, the 8 by 14 foot vision of the Yellowstone Canyon. And we juxtapose it to another canvas by a contemporary artist, Alexis Rockman, 8 by 20 feet long. And it is the bleak futuristic image of the Brooklyn waterfront after climate change has wreaked havoc. And adjacent to it are works of wildlife art, a wonderful kind of a cougar painted by a female artist. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name at the moment. And so we try to juxtapose moments of the West, images of the West, and important artists. And we have a quote up top by a Native American writer, Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you know her. She's written a book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And the quote we use around this Thomas Moran, Alexis Rockman alcove gallery space is, "We need acts of restoration not only for polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. And again, I think that's where American art can invite us, can move us along in our understanding our history, our present, and give us views of a better future. That's my firm belief. That's why I go to work every morning at one of the great art museums in our country, free to all.
Well,
That's a wonderful book. I just read it, Stephanie. Coincidentally, I'm going to drop the link to it in the chat.
Thank you.
And I see that Mitchell just put a question in chat. Mitchell, would you like to ask it verbally or hire your friendly narrator? Okay, I will do it.
I can do it if you wish.
Okay.
So what I thank you very much for this presentation. I really appreciate it and the questions. And what I have admired, having lived in Washington, about the Smithsonian American Art Museum is that it brings together Americans of all backgrounds. It presents art associated with many different regions and backgrounds. But the tendency today seems to be to create museums dedicated to only one group. For example, I know in Washington there's a Museum of Women in the Art, and there's the new African American Museum, and so on. What is your opinion about this trend and how it might affect us as Americans?
Well, Mitchell, as you may know, there are 19 museums in the Smithsonian family, and we're having twins. December of 2019, Congress authorized 2 new museums. Authorized, did not fund. That's the next step. A American Latino Museum and a Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. And one might say, we were devolving. We're having these sort of more specific museums. Look, all museums are good in my book. If you go to one museum, you're more likely to go to another. We certainly have museums that are specific to a type of medium. We've got the Corning Museum of Glass. We have a textile museum, and those span time and place. I can tell you, as co-chair of the American Women's History Initiative, a statistic I often use. I've been wearing that extra hat at the Smithsonian for a few years. When I started, I talked about how many entries in Wikipedia are about women. Women, not just American women, just women in general. When I started, the number was, I think, 17%. 17% of all Wikipedia entries are about women. In America, women make up 51% of the population. We have a problem. Now we're at 19%, and it's still rough sledding. So there are a lot of stories still to be told. And what I love about the Smithsonian and the African American History Museum was a great example, is we invited people to give their most cherished objects. Tell us about your remarkable grandmother, who was who voted, was the first one to vote in her family and got through some of the Jim Crow laws. Tell us the story about your the quilting circle of your aunts who were living on the reservation, and this was a way to bring family together. Send in the luggage of your grandmother who was interned in Idaho, and what those objects meant to the family. What was packed. And so again, I'm an optimist. I think all museums are good. And what I like about these new museums, frankly, Mitchell, is they challenge older museums like mine. I'm a 19th century museum. I'm living in a 19th century building. I need to be always thinking about 21st century audiences and needs and stories. So I'm keeping a close eye on my new baby Smithsonian museums, and we share our collections too, right? So nobody's coming to take my stuff away, but I have more objects that could be on public view. So
if I may just follow up, though, it makes it difficult for the collector who wants to donate to decide, this wonderful piece of work by an American woman artist should go to which of the various options now that we have. And you want to support all museums because they're all good. This is the hard part.
Indeed, luckily I'm not giving my collections away, but yes, it's a very personal decision. Often it's a curator who makes the first interaction. Sometimes it's the lucky director who gets to meet a collector and say, I have to make the case. One of the things I can say is pre-pandemic, in my main building in the old patent office, we had 2 million visitors a year. Okay, so there are a lot of people who can see your work. We also digitize. We have American art fellows who will study these collections. But again, you can say, I come from Detroit, my family is from Detroit, I want my collections to go to Detroit or to go to Montgomery or many other great cities that have wonderful fine arts museums.
Thank you.
We have a question from Colin Robinson. Do you have a favorite work in the Many Wests exhibition that is not in the SAM collection?
So first of all, it's like asking who's your favorite child.
Yeah.
I try never to answer that question. Certainly, there are artists that are new to me, and thank you. Actually, there are quite a number of Latinx artists. We have significant holdings of Latinx art, and yet there are other museums that have large Hispanic communities, and so have brought in more works. So there have been some real discoveries for us. It's given me a chance to add more works into the collection, prompted by our colleagues. And if you give me a little time, I can, there are a lot of contemporary Native American artists too that have been really surprising. And certainly I would love to keep some of the things and not return it to my sister museums. So how was that as evading the question?
Very deft.
Sorry.
That's good. Well, I look forward to seeing that exhibition, and so do you, for that matter. You
Yes.
know all about it, but you haven't actually walked in it. There's a question from Kirsten Held. Did you say you have 1,000 George Catlins? Any
Yes.
thoughts about interesting ways to present them? Mapping out his travels, perhaps.
Yes, actually, we try to mix up our Catlins. We recently had an exhibition on the importance of the American buffalo. So we pulled out a lot of Catlin buffalo images, and then we brought out Native American, more modern images of, again, the importance of the buffalo to many tribes. That was also a little bit in relationship to buffaloes being actually the first animals that entered the collection of the National Zoo. We used to have buffaloes grazing in front of the Smithsonian Castle on the National Mall. There's a great historic photo of that if somebody wants to pull that up. We recently did a really important exhibition on Alexander von Humboldt. No, he wasn't an artist. He was an important naturalist, scientist, explorer. And we had quite a number of Catlin portraits of Native Americans because Alexander von Humboldt encouraged explorers to go behind him after coming through South America, and also encouraged people to explore America. His close friend was Prince Maximilian, who brought the Swiss artist Bodmer, Karl Bodmer, with him, and who did very important images. A much better artist than the prince himself, who did some sketching in his journal. So the Catlins were included in that exhibition. So whenever we can, we bring them out, and we actually have them in our open storage in the Luce Center for American Art, available to people.
Any other questions? I'm just checking here on the chat. I don't see anything further. Now I'm looking for any raised hands. No, okay, that's all right.
May I ask a question?
Oh,
Sorry,
yes,
I can't
please.
type that fast. For a long time, I think Western art was thought of as cowboy art. And through the growth of museum exhibitions and now much more specialized museums such as the Booth and the James and the Jocelyn, et cetera, you know, the list is long, the Eiteljorg. It has more of a mainstay. Maybe, I think Peter many years ago said it very well by saying, good art is good art, whether it's Western art or, you know, it's not like we categorize Eastern art. And do you see this growing in terms of more and more museums across the board becoming, showing more exhibitions of Western art and even growing new museums such as the James?
So one of the exciting elements of this project is we're working with museums in communities where there's incredible growth. These are some of the fastest growing states and cities in the country. So where more people convene, I think there's always going to be a greater hunger for museums. Often museums are some of the first institutions founded, like in Tacoma. If you want to be a real city, you got to get an art museum, as just as you need to have a symphony hall and other things. And so there are also artists moving to this part of the country because the landscape is inspiring, the history is inspiring. People are returning home to their families in Washington State. The Hispanic community is majority populations in some of the smaller towns and have owned land and orchards for generations now. So there is a reshuffling, as in the rest of America, in terms of demographics, in terms of economic activity, and artists are going to be there to capture those stories. So I think that we can only expect great things from artists in that region, or artists who we recently had Kay Walking Stick speak. She's a member of the Cherokee Nation, and she lives in Pennsylvania now. However, the Grand Canyon is a subject that endlessly fascinating to her. Some of her most important contemporary works are of the Grand Canyon, juxtaposed with these kind of banded Native American abstracted elements that she takes off pottery or Navajo blankets and things like that. So a kind of a mixing of different cultures and place and history. And she also was attracted to the Southwest, as Peter is with some of his art selections.
She's a wonderful artist for sure. We have a question from Seth Hopkins. Any digital Western art in Sam's future? ?
Thank you, Seth. If you ask for it, I'll see what I can deliver. So we actually have a curator of time-based media, Saisha Grayson. She's really terrific and building the collection significantly. Of course, the core of our collection are the important archives of Nam June Paik, kind of a father in many ways of at least American artists working again in what we call time-based media. Yes, we have some artworks. Again, I'm going to have to send you an email. There's so many works of art coming. We purchase about 200 to 300 works of art a year or get gifts. And so when I'm making the presentation, I have everybody's name memorized, but if it's a year or two ago, it's a little harder. So we bought a time-based media piece, Native American artist, and it will be in our upcoming exhibition called Musical Thinking, about musical elements in time-based media, and Native American artists actually shooting off rifles in a kind of a syncopation that relates to a composition and other works. We have works in the Chicano Graphic Show, which use augmented reality and virtual reality. So yes, we're collecting that area. It's a little tricky. Sometimes I ask myself, what are we buying exactly? If you can download that for free on the internet, what exactly have we purchased? We're all tiptoeing into this new arts territory together.
Yes, it is confusing. Okay, I am delighted. I can't believe it's actually 5 after 8 already. So we have exceeded our allotted time, but there's been a lot to discuss. Stephanie, thank you. It seems to me that it is so exciting that we can gather despite the pandemic in this way. And we are really grateful for your time, knowing how fast you're running these days, traveling as it becomes safer to do so. Thank you for devoting more than an hour to us. We really are excited about Many Wests. We're looking forward to seeing it wherever it may be traveling on its national tour, and certainly at the latest in Washington. I'd like to thank everyone on the call for joining us. Thank you to everyone involved with the Clark Hulings Fund. Thank you to Shirley Holland. And we want to remind you that a recording of this will be available down the line. There will be a message going out from Penelope about that. Penelope, would you like to add anything specifically in the way of housekeeping or announcements for the future?
Just to reiterate our thanks to both of you, Peter and Stephanie, for a wonderful conversation. I'm dropping some links in the chat. If you are moved, we are a nonprofit and we appreciate your support. Keep your eyes on the Salon's page for the next event, and we will add the video of this event there, and I will send it out to this whole group as well. So we appreciate you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. And the West is in the news now, unfortunately, in the border image that we've seen, which are deeply disturbing. However, we have a love of the West, and we know that artists will help us understand the complex histories of both the past and the present and the ever-evolving future too. And the one good thing about the pandemic is it's actually brought us closer together through such great things like this virtual salon. So
Yes.
I'll be tuning in the future as a new fan. And thanks, Peter, for being a longtime friend and a gentle questioner and great preparation on the images. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
to
so
see you.
much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks.